The old cliche is that war never changes. But what happens when the hellish actions of war manifest as monsters that trap people in time loops of their worst deeds? Well, even then, it turns out the cruelty of mankind itself are still worse than any supernatural destruction, and Hell Is Us uses its fantastical, near-future setting to take a dark, authentic look at the horrors of war. While the actual act of fighting your way through the monsters of this devastated nation isn't doing much that's new to the action-adventure genre, Hell Is Us kept me entertained throughout my 38-hour adventure nonetheless. Its combat is simple but satisfying, and its world is full of puzzles that push you to really pay attention, which makes for a campaign filled with intrigue, grief, and sometimes a little frustration. Hell Is Us is equal parts exploration, combat, and puzzle solving. It's a familiar formula if you've played games like God of War or Resident Evil before, but roaming the fictional country of Hadia as Remy, an exile smuggled out of the country as a child, proved to be a different kind of challenge. You're told up front that there is no map, waypoint system, or indication of where to go next. I had to retrain my brain in the early hours of Hell Is Us as I adapted to how it does things, like I was riding a bike without training wheels for the first time. While frustrating at first, that frustration seemed to fade away around the midpoint of Act 1, and I could feel myself more quickly pinpointing the necessary clues I needed to progress. What starts as a quest for answers about Remy's missing family, his whole reason for returning to Hadia, quickly becomes a series of puzzles and scavenger hunts that reveal a bigger picture. With both that mystery and a large number of items to collect, the lack of a traditional map or waypoint system meant I found it almost mandatory to keep physical notes on what I had seen. That was especially true as I assembled a lengthy list of puzzles and NPCs that required specific items I had yet to find, with some items that wouldn't even become available until later portions of the story. At first, I was caught off guard by how front and center the puzzle component is in Hell Is Us. Not because I disliked them, but because it just wasn't what I expected going in. There are plenty of puzzles to solve with all the usual suspects represented, aligning symbols to open doors, delivering specific items to NPCs, deciphering safe codes, finding color-coded keys, stepping on pressure plates, and more. While I've only solved about 3/4 of them so far, most solutions have ranged from obvious to mild head-scratchers. This is a nice place for them to land because there are a lot of things to keep track of on your own at once, but I never got stuck in one place for too long, and the rewards typically were worth the effort. The only mildly frustrating part of some puzzles is that you don't always know if you have everything you need to solve them, or if certain key pieces are even available yet, as many items don't show up until you progress further.
Thank you for returning it.
That would usually be such a minor inconvenience that it wouldn't even be worth mentioning. However, because Hell Is Us takes pride in not automatically tracking the specifics of stuff like quests and puzzles, if you don't keep detailed notes, or if you happen to take a few days off from playing, it can lead to running around in circles searching for an unknowable solution. Speaking of running in circles, while the first act is initially pretty straightforward, I found myself getting a bit lost after a few hours. Without a map, it was tough to figure out where I had and hadn't been. You can't progress to new locations without uncovering specific clues or NPCs that give you information about those zones, so I began to lose steam towards the midpoint of Act 1. However, this pain point completely went away in the following 2 acts thanks to the combination of more characters that reliably offer information about the quest, and my own acclimation to how I was meant to decipher the breadcrumbs of the story. As Remy, you are a first-hand witness to Hell Is Us themes of hate, violence, brutality, and humanity being its own worst enemy. They are seen in every NPC conversation, location, and piece of lore you find on the search for Remy's family. You would think that the worst of what you have to face are the hollowed monsters plaguing the streets and countrysides of Hadia, but if history has told us anything time and time again, our worst enemies are always ourselves. It wasn't those haunting enemies that stuck with me past the credits, but the imagery of the world, the harrowing events described by its survivors, and the vitriol characters often had for one another. It's almost impossible not to draw parallels between the horrors portrayed throughout Remy's journey and current events happening in the real world. Hadia's towns are ravaged by war, filled with imagery of civilian executions and propaganda, as 2 fictional races of people, the Palamists and Sabinians, constantly blame the other for everything wrong in the world. Add in the rise of those terrifying new hollow creatures which are impervious to traditional weapons, and it culminates in a believable alternate history with horrors rooted in our own. Hell Is Us wears its grim view of a collapsed civilization and its struggling population on its sleeve. Every major NPC can be asked about Hadia, the war, peacekeepers, the hollow creatures, and both the Palamists and Sabinians. And unlike the obscure puzzles and riddles throughout the world, the characters speak plainly about their feelings on each topic, be that a young girl who calls everyone on the other side murderers, or a member of the military who has no issues whatsoever with collateral damage.
When you have a cockroach problem in your home, you don't negotiate with the vermin to leave. You exterminate them.
While these conversations won't progress any storylines or assist in side quests, they all help to paint an effective picture of the current state of the world and how it came to be.
We need to progress. The only way to achieve greatness is to rid ourselves of the Palamist swine.
These conversations were enlightening, but they are also tough to swallow in today's world, especially when myself and many others use video games as a means of escapism. There were times when it often felt like too much, but the thought of ignoring these kinds of experiences felt cynical and disrespectful to those enduring similar tragedies daily. Even minor NPCs struck a chord as I encountered a small settlement of survivors, many of whom have lost families, limbs, and more. Hell Is Us never strays away from showing the cost of war, and it's better for it. These tragedies aren't just there for show either, as they also feed into the important time loop mechanic. Time loops appear as concentrated spheres of negative energy derived from truly heinous actions such as public executions, murder, and other tragic events, and they can only be cleared by removing an area of its time loop guardians. Though most are optional, clearing them provides rewards like key items for certain puzzles or NPCs and various weapon upgrades, and also stops enemies from respawning in that vicinity, which was enough incentive for me to tackle them when convenient. The Guardians appear as regular hollow enemies at a glance, but are slightly tougher fights due to their higher health and attack power. Although more often than not, they were still so easy, I would only realize I had just faced a Guardian after the fact. So they didn't stand out as meaningful or memorable fights to match the somber moments around them. Combat not quite scratching the itch I hoped it would was a consistent theme throughout most of Hell Is Us. It has all the staples you'd expect in an action-adventure game: attack combos, charge attacks, parries, dodges, and special abilities that improve both your weapons and a drone that fights alongside you. But while it has the ingredients of a great combat system, they never come together to make something more impressive than the sum of its parts. That isn't to say combat is bad in any way, because it can still be quite fun, but it never really wowed me either. Even the executions for certain enemies, which shift the camera perspective in an attempt to punch up the stylishness of those moves, didn't amaze me despite being functionally useful. Early on, Remy learns that standard weapons are useless against the hollow enemies and quickly builds up an arsenal of limbic weapons with special properties: swords, twin axes, polearms, and more, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. As you explore and solve various puzzles or help the citizens of Hadia, you unlock glyphs that can be equipped to weapons to augment them with properties such as rage, ecstasy, terror, and grief. Upgrading weapons with different properties will not only change their appearance, but also change which abilities they can equip. I was a big fan of Rage as it supercharged my aggressive playstyle, allowing me to stagger enemies and giving me some ranged options. Meanwhile, Terror ended up being an augment for my second weapon as it allowed me to drain enemies of their health at a safe distance. Hell Is Us also takes a different approach to healing while in combat. Dealing damage refills your health, but only if you cash in after landing an attack or combo without taking damage. This was a double-edged sword for me, as it's an interesting, unique system, but one that meant I would often not worry about how much damage I was taking because I knew that landing 1 or 2 combos would be enough to heal me back up in a pinch. It allowed me to be more aggressive in the hopes of out-healing any damage I took, but occasionally my bravado would get the best of me and lead to either death or finishing a fight with critical health. My strategy had to change as I reached the later acts, with specific enemies that could chain attacks to interrupt or stagger me, preventing me from retaliating or causing me to get overwhelmed by a group. That said, Hell Is Us lacks enemy variety overall, with only 5 types of visually distinct hollow enemies. That is a letdown because I really like their designs, which range from a humanoid with an eerie black void in place of its face and chest, to a mage with large ribbed wings that creates damaging zones on the ground. And I was hoping to see the team behind them flex their creative muscles even more. It is similarly lacking in the boss department, with only 2 traditional bosses across the 3 acts. It does have a few gauntlets of enemies to fight through that act as pseudo-bosses for certain areas, but they just don't have the same impact after delving through multiple floors of a dungeon. Thankfully, the roster is padded out with 12 haze-type enemies in addition to the hollows. These don't have the same cool, distinct designs, instead looking like more generic shapes or creatures made of small, colorful blocks. But what they lack in visual flair, they make up for in challenge, as these enemies were often the ones to either overwhelm me or give me a better fight. Early on, hollow enemies become entwined with each other and various haze enemies, preventing them from losing health until the attached hazes have been subjugated. This creates a small dance of taking down the haze and then attempting to defeat the hollow before that haze could respawn, adding a nice layer of complexity to the otherwise simple combat. Hell Is Us is a blend of exploration, puzzles, and combat that, while familiar, pushes you to really pay attention to the world around you in a way that's both compelling and occasionally frustrating. Its stark approach to quest and map tracking forces you to use your own powers of observation and take notes to solve its challenges, and the puzzles littered throughout the world kept me on my toes more than action-adventure games like this typically do. Though its lack of enemy variety and fairly straightforward combat mean the action sections don't stack up in the same way, there are enough tools in Remy's arsenal to at least have a good time while taking down its monsters. Hell Is Us doesn't shy away from showing the dark reality of a country ravaged by war while doing so, as well as how the worst parts of humanity are, in the end, more harrowing than our most terrifying nightmares. It holds up a mirror to us and the world we live in, pushing the boundaries of its own audience's discomfort in a way that will stick with me past any of its fights. For more, check out our reviews of Chronos: The New Dawn or Metal Gear Solid Delta. And for everything else, stick with IGN.